I am so glad you convinced me that the family car should be the Defender 110. It is so beautiful inside, it's so comfortable, and it just feels indestructible.
Yes, it really is. I've been waiting a long time for the new model to come out. The Defender 110, I'm telling you, it's my favorite car of all times. It's my third one. You know, I have stories of going off road. The guy managed the group. He was like, "What are you doing in this beautiful car?" I'm like, "I'm going off road." He's like, "Are you sure? Because you can use one of ours." And then they look like Mad Max cars. I'm like, no, we're going to do this. And he was shocked.
Wow. Well, it's great because the Defender has been reimagined for 21st century adventure, and its unparalleled off-road ability as well as its robust interior are invaluable whether you're headed towards uncharted territory or just a weekend of exploration. The Defender 110 tackles challenging surroundings with absolute confidence. The SUV conveys strength outside and in, featuring peerless technology like an intuitive driver display and an award-winning infotainment system. That's my favorite part, to keep you connected no matter where the journey takes you. Adventure is unique to everyone, and so is the Defender. Choose from the two-door Defender 90, the four-door Defender 110, or the larger Defender 130 with the ability to seat up to 8 passengers. You'll find uncompromising performance in all three. So pack up and go even further with the Defender 110. Learn more at LandRoverUSA.com/Defender.
Sometimes it takes a different approach to help you unlock your true potential. Capella University's game-changing FlexPath format helps you learn at your own pace and fit earning a degree into your life. From before you enroll to after you graduate, you'll be supported by people who are invested in your success so you can pursue your goals knowing that help is available if you need it. Imagine your future differently at capella.edu.
This isn't your average business podcast, and he's not your average host. This is the James Altucher Show. Today on the James Altucher Show.
Man, I know so many people in so many different kinds of debt. There's student loan debt, IRS debt, credit card debt. What do you do about debt? My guest today, he has a podcast, the DIY Money Podcast, where he deals specifically with how he solved his own debt issues, and he talks to many other people about it. But we're going to talk directly about the smartest way to deal with debt, and I'm going to talk about probably the dumbest ways to deal with debt, and you could decide which way. You should probably do both ways, but here it is. You know, I don't really do a lot of podcasts about finance. I write about finance, but I used to do a lot more with this between 2000 and 2010. And anyway, I don't really like talking about stocks or investing and all that stuff. But right now, we're living in a very different time. Everyone always says, "Oh, no, you can't say this time it's different." Well, guess what? This time it's different. You know, 1 out of 3 Americans were laid off from their jobs. I don't care what the unemployment rate is. I don't trust any of those numbers. We know that 55 million people had to apply for unemployment insurance. We know that there's probably 30 million people who are 4 months behind on their rent and they're about to be evicted unless there's some kind of relief. We know that there's 1.5 trillion in student loan debt. We know that there's probably another trillion or more in credit card debt. We know that mortgage debt is huge and a lot of people haven't been able to pay it back, which means that not only the homeowners and the credit card holders and so on in debt, but the people who lent the money and the people who lent money to the credit card people and the people who lent money to the students and on and on and on. The companies are in debt. So you have citizens, you know, the individuals in debt. You have companies in debt. You have landlords in debt. Everybody is going to get crunched. And we're here to not scare you, but to find solutions. So I called up a good friend of mine, Quint Tatro, who runs his own money management fund called Joule Financial. He also does the excellent podcast, which I highly recommend, DIY, for do-it-yourself, DIY Money. I called up Quint. He came on over, and we're going to talk about debt and how to get rid of it. And I think Quint and I have not quite different opinions on it, but depending on circumstances, I think my solutions could be a bit more radical. So probably listen to Quint first and then say, well, I need a plan B. And that's what I'm going to maybe provide. We'll see. But Quint, welcome to the show.
Thanks, James. So good to be here. I appreciate it.
I'm so glad you came here. You're the first person I've done on the podcast in person since February, actually.
Well, this is a beautiful place to be. You have a lovely place here.
Thank you. We did the escape from New York temporarily in Florida here. But so first off, I want to start hitting this from a very basic point of view first. If you're 17 years old, 16 years old, and we'll get to the people who are 45 and were laid off from their jobs or have some other difficulties and have all the debts I outlined above. But how should a kid start understanding debt? Because I could tell you when I was 18 or even when I was 51, I had no clue what debt was or what it meant to my life.
Yeah. Well, so the interesting thing is it's not just debt, it's understanding money, finances, their budget. And this, I tell you what hit home with me. I teach an upper level finance class at the University of Kentucky. It's an intrinsic value class. It's an investing class. And off the cuff, I was talking to one of my brightest students, and I'm sure he'll be listening to this podcast. He'll laugh.
What's his name?
Michael Zhu. He's actually he's an analyst now at like a big bulge bracket firm in the city. So he'll laugh at this. But what were you going to say to Michael?
No, I was just going to say pay attention and tell us if tweet at us if he messes anything up here.
Well, the funny thing is I was talking to him about how over the weekend I went to open a bank account with my 13-year-old son, and it was so difficult. He had to use his passport to get it open, which it was a fluke that he even had a passport. I had taken him overseas, and so we happened to have that. And we went down, we opened this checking account, and I was teaching him how to balance his checkbook. And Michael said, "What are you even talking about?"
Well, to be honest, I don't even know what you're talking about. And let me just guess.
Sure.
Because people always say the phrase. I've heard the phrase. I've never done it in my life, so I have never even looked up what it means to balance a checkbook. Does that mean you save all your receipts and make sure it matches all the checks you've written?
I do that and
by the way,
have
who writes checks anymore?
No, well, true. I do that and have for 20 some years. I'm personally very OCD. I do it in Excel and know where every dollar is spent. It's not as you can go to that extreme for sure, but it's not just about that. It's more about knowing where your money's going.
Right, and let me address that for a second. I'm sorry if I interrupt occasionally. John Doerr, the venture capitalist, wrote an excellent book that I have not read, but how can I say it's excellent? Because I love books where if you read the title, you know the entire book. You don't have to read the book if you just know the title. So the title is Measure What Matters. So by measuring all of your expenses, OCD or not, it does tell you, oh my gosh, if I hadn't spent 20% of my, extra cash flow on cigarettes, I would have had X amount of dollars 5 years from now if it compounds at this rate. So stuff like that is useful. And then you could say, well, this is another reason to stop smoking. I'm just using that as an example. But the more you measure, the more you're going to know about yourself and the things that are important to you.
And that's true across all things. We know whether it's fitness and weight loss or it's even finance. And so when he brought this up to me and said, he goes, what are you talking about? And bright kid, obviously, super smart kid. But I said, well, it's a matter of tracking your expenses so you know where your money's going. And he goes, well, isn't that what my app's for? I mean, I can just log in and see it. And it blew me away because, again, if you don't measure where your money is, if you're not understanding where your money's going, how can you make these changes? This dawned on me. The reason we started this podcast, wrote the book, et cetera, was as you did in the introduction. Years ago, 20 years ago, I started a wealth management firm. We cater to mid to high net worth individuals, retirement planning, et cetera. It's a wonderful business, but I have a great passion for helping people who are trying to figure out how to get through the month. And was very difficult. I would counsel people, I would meet with people, and think about it. It's a terrible. There's no business in it. I mean, great. A lot of time. It's a wonderful service, but
if you think about it, by definition, these are someone who's in massive debt enough that it's a real serious problem for them. They're not going to have like extra cash.
you're not going to charge them, right?
You can't charge them.
Not going to charge them. So I racked my brain and said, okay, what can we do? And so the podcast was born. The book was born. But there's a million podcasts out there that do this. But what I realized is I drew on my own experience. And 20 years ago, when I was starting my business and I was broke and I was trying to figure out how to be a financial advisor while pay off debt, which was ironic. Everybody simply comes out of the gate and says, well, get a budget. And the reality is most people have no idea how to create a budget. And they don't know how to do that because they don't track their expenses. They don't start understanding where their money is going. And so I sat down and I started saying, okay, in order to create a budget, I've got to start tracking all my expenses. I started doing this, and just as you alluded to in your example regarding that other book, my eyes were open to where I was spending my money. And it dawned on me very quickly, I am going to go nowhere in life financially if I don't get a hold of how much I'm spending eating out, how much I'm spending on gas, how much it's absurd. So,
and just to your point, like I remember, and again, I've always been clueless about this, and sometimes there's good reasons to be clueless about something, but I remember when I had my first major job, and my boss, who was making a lot more money than me, obviously, he would bring in his, paper bag every day and have a sandwich and an apple, and that was it. And I would be going out and eating out and spending, $10 on a sandwich, back in the 90s, it's like ridiculous. And he was spending nothing. And I remember I ran into him I ran into about 15 years later, and he told me he had just retired. He had saved $3 million as an employee of, HBO, and he was good. That was it. And he had saved, and it compounded.
And the reality too is, you hear people talk about, and I've heard this thrown around, this stat or whatever you want to call it. Number one reason for divorce is financial matters. I have never seen that proven. I've looked for it. But I can tell you that almost every divorce that you study, or the statistics, one of the commonalities regarding the stress in the relationship or in the marriage ends up being money. So whether that resulted in the divorce or not, so it's literally the stress, the anxiety of finances is tearing people apart. It's tearing families apart. It's tearing marriages apart. You talk about, why I love your podcast. You talk about these kids coming out of school with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, and they're not. You opened my eyes to this angle, which I didn't really. You helped me realize this was, if you graduate college with hundreds of thousands of dollars of debt, now you're subject to have to get a job to start paying that. So there goes our whole generation of entrepreneurs that could start a business. They can't take the risk.
Right. Like back in the 60s, college, student loan debt has gone up it's gone up 10 times faster than inflation since the 60s. So now literally you cannot, make enough money anymore to pay down your debt. And what's happened is back in the 60s, you could graduate, okay, maybe you were $1,000 in debt, $150 in debt. You could get a job in Silicon Valley or anywhere, learn some skills in the real world, start a company. And this is where all innovation in the United States has come from. And what I'm scared about with $1.5 trillion in student loan debt, not to mention the other debts we're going to talk about, what's going to happen? We're going to lose that edge that we've always had. No matter what happens with this pandemic and these lockdowns, we know that ingenuity and the openness of America to ingenuity has created generation after generation of accelerated, technology, innovations, amazing things in science and genomics and AI and whatever you want to call it, the internet. And I'm worried that's gone, combined with this lockdown, which has put everybody into extreme debt now, unexpectedly.
Yeah, that's great concern. I do want to go back. You started this off and said, what do you tell the 17-year-old? And so I want to address that. And what I do tell a 17-year-old is It's time now to just start learning about anywhere you can, because they don't teach it in schools. Yes, there's some curriculums that are starting to introduce personal finance, but it's not a widely taught subject matter. And so kids are coming out of high school, they're coming out of college, many instances, they have no idea how to balance a checkbook. They have no idea what, credit scores, credit debt, they have no idea of these things. So anybody who is listening that is in that camp and going, well, how do I learn about this? Just start listening to the podcast, right? Start listening to podcasts, start reading books, there's a wealth of information out there. And the challenge that I have is, yes, there's a lot of information about starting a business, being an entrepreneur, and so forth, but many people are underwater and need to get to zero before they can start to figure out how to leave their job or start a business or, et cetera. And they got to learn how to do that. And that's the whole point of what we do.
Yeah, and I was talking to someone a few months ago, and he was telling me he was a junior and he was $100,000 in debt already, and that's a lot of money. Nobody, you even if you have millions and millions of dollars, you don't want to be $100,000 in debt necessarily. And I said to him, "You're only a junior, and what are you majoring in?" And that got you $100,000 in debt. And he said he's majoring in business. And I said, I think you should switch majors, because business 101, don't start a business if you're, don't go $100,000 in debt until you start a business.
Yeah.
So, I think people don't understand. They think that magically they'll start a business and they'll make it all back. And I've seen this. I've interviewed kids on, at NYU. I've gone to NYU and interviewed people. How much debt are you in? Well, how do you think you're going to pay it? And they nobody had a good answer.
Yeah.
Nobody had a correct answer. And there's no correct answer, but people would say, "Oh, I'll just take, 5% of my income every month." You're not going to be able to afford it. You're not going to be able to do it.
But we all are. We're also in a time period. So it's easy for us to say, don't do that. But there's millions of people who are already there, right? They're already there.
Right.
They're listening to this podcast. They're going, well, that's great. I wish I would have known that when I was 17. But the reality is you can get out of that debt. You absolutely can. You can combine a disciplined approach to understanding where your money is going. You can literally get after it and hustle as far as, okay, we were working with a couple. I don't do a lot of one-on-one mentoring anymore, but this couple, I've kind of adopted them in a way for years. They sold their home with their family of 3 kids, 5 people, moved into an apartment because they cut their monthly expenses significantly. Their apartment was right next to the school they attend, so no longer did they have to have 2 cars because one car was running back and forth to school. The kids were right there. And fast forward doing this for 18 months, they completely paid off they had 2 car payments, and even though they got rid of one, they still had a car, they were underwater. They paid off credit card debt, some store cards, and then they were in a position to turn around and buy another house and start again. But they had to make a dramatic shift. It was a lot of work, but it can be done. It absolutely can be done.
Right. So let me ask you a couple of questions about that, because I'll tell you the reason why that might be hard for me, and this is a bad reason, but it's worth noting. I think I would be ashamed. I think I would be like, I don't want to have to admit to everybody I need to downsize. That's embarrassing. They're going to think I'm stupid or I failed or whatever. And I think that's a reason why a lot of times I did actually end up going broke, is because I probably should have cut the cord much faster. But so that's the first question. How do you deal with that?
Well, that's pride, and pride comes before the fall. So you're if you can't get over that, if you can't own your situation, and unfortunately we live in a society where it's socially acceptable to walk around and pretend like you are wealthy and you have no money at all. In fact, you're completely upside down. Some of our largest clients, if I brought them in here, you'd feel bad for them, want to give them buy them a cup of coffee, and they're worth, $10 million. It's just crazy. Person who comes in, blinged out, they probably can't even afford their lease payment. But
there's a saying, you don't know what someone's worth until they file for bankruptcy.
Yeah.
So,
but I share with people, there's a chapter in the book that talks about learning to say no, and you have to plan ahead. when I first started down this path, and my wife, who joined me today, she's joined on this trip. It's birthday weekend, right? So that's a fun trip.
By the way, happy birthday!
Thank you.
I can't believe you're doing a podcast on your birthday, but hey, good for
you know,
me.
but I can believe it because I've had a goal to be on your podcast for a very long time. I've loved your work, James. It's been very inspirational to me and helpful for my family for years. So this is really a dream come true. But when we were first married, when Brandy and I were first married, we said no a lot, and we learned, and going back from the very beginning, we paid for our own wedding, and we would sit down once a week and we would budget and save. And our wedding, I think we spent like 20 grand, which it was a lot of money for us at the time. I know today's wedding, some dresses cost that much, but when that finished and the wedding was over and we had paid for it, we had saved for it, that set us on a path together to work as a team to really accomplish any financial goal that we wanted to put forward.
But I think that's an important point. Like, I think part of the shame thing for me is, and this maybe is a male thing, maybe it's not, but I would feel like I'm letting Robin, my wife, down if I tell her, and look, this is all on me. She would be fine with whatever, I'm sure, but I would just feel like I let her down if I have to, because like you said, let's say you're already in this situation, and we're not talking about hypothetical. Let's say you're already in it, and you have to do something that lets someone down, and you had this whole ego tied to it, and masculinity tied to it, and who knows what else tied to it. I don't know. I think I'd have to work really hard on the psychology.
You nailed it. It's a psychological game. And but you're going to have to rip the Band-Aid off, or it's going to be ripped off one way or the other. So the reality is, I remember us, saying no to friends. They would be traveling or they would be doing this, and we just couldn't do it. We were like, no, we can't afford it right now. We're saving for this, or we're trying to pay this off, et cetera. And fast forward, many years, it, number one, allowed us to take risk. And again, you talk a lot about this, which I just love. By getting out of debt early in our marriage and working together, that allowed me to really sacrifice and start building a business. And so fast forward, 15 years after that, now we not only have been able to be blessed and successful in the business, but now we can enjoy the fruits of our labor and not have to worry about debt, not have to worry about, paying bills. I mean, we pay bills, but we don't have to go, oh my goodness, we still are carrying around this debt and then pretending. Absolutely. And it drives my wife nuts to this day. I still track every penny that we spend all the time. I don't know, now it's almost habit, but I still track almost every penny or every single penny that we spend in an Excel sheet. We have a budget. We still accrue for, Christmas expenses, travel expenses, you name it. We still do it. To this day. But I tell kids, you have to learn, and people in general, I don't care what their age is, you have to learn how to say no. You have to be honest, and you have to, really tear off the Band-Aid and realize really where you are.
There's one aspect, though, that's interesting, which is that debt. Forget about college debt for a second. Even though most of the country has to deal with that, and it's this exorbitant amount, and it's a huge scam. Most people, when they're young, probably shouldn't save that much, because let's say, my first serious job, I was 26 years old. I was making the huge salary then for me of $40,000 a year, and it would have been an enormous stress for me to save any money then. And it would have been pointless too. What would I have saved? $500 a month, even $1,000 a month, which when you're young, the increase in your earnings potential increases so much faster than your debt load. Again, forget student loan debt for a second. Your earnings potential increases so much faster than your debt increases. It's not really that big a deal, I feel. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong.
Well, here's the deal. You and I, we're entrepreneurs. We think about the businesses and all the money that can be made. You were talking about, are you going to start a business? This business idea you have. Are you going to? And in your mind, it's like, this business is going to be successful. The challenges you and I have is not, will a business idea work? It's, do we really want to put the time and energy in it to make it work? And the reality, though, is most people are not like that. Most people don't have that gene of entrepreneurial, developing business ideas and trying to figure things out, coming back from, being broke a few times. They don't have that. So the reality is if you can share with somebody that, look, average car payment in the United States is around $350. Over the next 30 years, it will go up to around $500. So if you were to just eliminate a car payment, $500, and put it in an S&P 500 index fund, in 30 years, you have about $1 million. So in the United States,
that's $500 a month.
$500 a month, $6,000 a year, right? Which again, I always. People don't put that into context. So when you're talking about early, it depends on what your goals and objectives are. I mean, yeah, if you're just got your first job coming out of school and you've got, tremendous amount of bills and you can't save anything, well, I think you have to evaluate, are you on a path where your earnings are going to be, exploding because you took a sacrifice, you went to a city, maybe you couldn't afford it completely, but the job earning power is amazing, and in 10 years you will be able to save. Or you're in a situation where you're going, look, I can't really even afford what I'm doing. I hate my job. I don't see earnings power, increasing dramatically, and I'm not saving. Well, that's terrible. So again, I don't mean to bunt on it, but it does depend on what that future looks like for a person, for sure.
Yeah, and I guess, look, it's very much related to happiness also. Like there's that famous Benjamin Franklin quote, which I'll try to remember right now. Basically, if you spend, if you make $100 a year, but you spend $101, then you're miserable. If you make $100 a year and you spend 99, happiness.
Yeah.
And so it's really that simple. And unfortunately, because of the way I feel marketing has happened for colleges and for education, and look, it's a very big thing to say, oh, you shouldn't go to college, blah, blah, blah. Everybody's like, oh no, I have to do that. But the math has changed. People don't realize the math has changed over the years because the acceleration of debt has gone up much faster than inflation. It's going to college now is not the same as going in the 60s, 70s, 80s, or even 90s. You get into this unbelievable debt so quickly in a generational way that's never happened before.
Yeah.
So like, let's just start with that then. With right now specifically, let's say someone's 28 years old, 29 years old. They have student loan debt. They were doing fine, but now the pandemic happened. 50 million people are having difficulties. Maybe a lot of people forgot about their rents, and rent was postponed. But here's the thing: like I never would have been able to say, back then, oh, here's 4 months of rent. By the way, here you go. I would have just forgotten about it, and everybody would have been. These 30 million people are going to need to, figure out 4 months of rent. What's going to happen with all these people?
Yeah, I don't know. The short answer is I genuinely don't know. But I think people, the first thing they've got to do is communicate. I mean, if somebody is listening and they're 30 days from being put out on the street, you're scrambling. So you got to communicate. Again, the worst thing you can do is just go into a shell and not tell anybody. You got to communicate with your landlord. You got to communicate with your, there's, if you notice on your electric bill or your utility bill, they no longer, at least in our state, they no longer have delinquency charges. So there's never been national empathy for financial situation as we see today. We didn't even have empathy in 2008, 2009 like we do today. So the reality is, if you are in a situation where in 30 days, 45 days, 15 days, you're going to be out on the street, you need to be letting your landlord know. You need to be communicating with your loved ones. You need to be honest with people around you. And there's there's people who will help for sure.
Yeah, and I think proactively is better than for what you're saying now, and there's going to be a spectrum of potential solutions here. But the first one is being proactive.
Yes.
Let's say your landlord has 20 apartments in a building, and 19 of them are scared to death, and they might just either avoid the landlord or hope for an extension somehow or government stimulus. But I think being proactive and coming up with some solutions is better than nothing.
That's right. And then here's the deal. You get after it. The bottom line is, if you are in this situation, if you are of able mind and body and you can physically get out there, my empathy level is very low. And the reality is because I have witnessed people firsthand get out there and get after it. And what I mean by that is you've never been in a time period like we are today where you can work a normal 9-to-5 job and then you can go do Grubhub, DoorDash, you can do Uber, Lyft, you can deliver pizzas. They can't, in our town, Lexington, Kentucky, they can't get pizza drivers. I mean, they're dying for pizza drivers, delivery drivers. So the reality is that you can build margin in your budget, not just by cutting, which, by the way, if you are in that situation and you haven't cut all of your, ancillary services and your Netflix and your this, that, and the other, no disrespect to Netflix, but that's crazy. You should be cutting everything. So once that's done, if you still don't have enough margin to get ahead and start tackling some of these debts, then ultimately you're going to have to make additional income. And we're in that environment where we can. And what I want to say is, I'll never forget, I had one of my best friends. He was in his mid-30s at the time, and he's head of a very successful and well-known nonprofit in our town, Christian ministry organization. They do amazing things. He was head of this organization. It was a big budgeted organization, but he couldn't get out of debt. He didn't make a lot of money, and so he had to create margin. And so in his mid-30s, late 30s, a small child and his wife at home, he took a paper delivery route. And every morning at 3:30, he would be up rolling papers, and him and his wife, with his kid in the back seat, would go around and deliver these papers. And he did this for like 3.5 years. They paid off credit card debt. They paid off an auto debt. And then he socked some money away. He started buying up some rental properties. Now he has a dozen or so rental properties while he's still the head of this nonprofit organization. So it can be done. It absolutely can be done.
So I'm curious, like let's say you've got student loan debt and you're just screwed. Like you're unemployed right now because of this pandemic. You don't know what you're going to do. Nobody's hiring. Maybe you live in some area where there's still a total lockdown, which is, to some extent most of the country or a big part of the country. Is there a way, and we'll get to all the kinds of debt, but is there a way you could just avoid paying your student loan debt right now?
Well, you call them up and you go on forbearance. So yes, you can. I mean, you can go on and you can get them basically put on hold while you are looking for a job. You're unemployed.
So again, being proactive as opposed to just not paying.
Yeah. If again, a lot of it is personal responsibility. And this is where we in our podcast, or why I wrote the book, was almost to just sort of challenge and motivate people. You got to get motivated to get after it. And I know what happens is it's Murphy's Law. You're going to get motivated. You might hear this podcast. You might listen to our podcast and start getting fired up and saying, enough is enough. I'm going to do this. I'm going to change. Boom. Tires are out on your car. HVAC's out. Roof's going to leak. Let me tell you something. It's almost like a battle, and you are going to get hit with an unexpected expense. Keep going, right? Just keep after it. You will start to make progress. And once you do, then the snowball will continue, and you will go down the road and it'll change your life. But getting back to that individual, you can put those student loans on hold. You can call them up. You have to be proactive. Call them up, and then look at your life. I mean, again, read your book. Choose yourself. Look at your life and say, okay, you said it. You said, what if somebody's just screwed? So you sit there and you go, I'm screwed. I have insurmountable student loan debt. Well, then you're going to have to look at your life and you're going to have to say, now's the time to pivot and consider another option. We work with a young man who 6 or 8 weeks ago was making $12 an hour in a factory. He has no college degree. He went to truck driving school, and this coming year, he'll make $150,000 as a truck driver. Dramatic life change, because he took 3 or 4 weeks. He decided to go to truck driving school. It was sponsored, by the way. Somebody else helped. My wife and I helped to put him through truck driving school. And now he'll dramatically change his income level because he decided to change his career. There are options out there. Google just released, what was it, $300 to take the Google curriculum online.
Yeah, no,
that
that's unbelievable.
that they're going to now
that'll
start
change
looking at.
education.
That's what I'm saying. So look at what you're doing. You might have to. When my first business failed during college, we started at .com. It was great for a while. Then it absolutely blew up. I had to go home. I had to move in. I mean, if you don't have the relationship with your family still, that's a shame. Maybe you can couch surf for a while, but you might have to make some dramatic life changes to then start figuring out how to get ahead in life.
So let's say though you call up, you need some breathing room. Will the government say, okay, we're going to give you a few months to, we're not going to punish you too much, you'll be cool for a few months, don't worry about it? What happens? Like, how can you?
That's my understanding. Yeah, I mean, you can call them up and you can say, I'm unemployed. I put these student loans in forbearance for the time being, and then you can be looking for a job. The reality is too, and I don't advocate this, but if this is wrecking your life, and you're looking at a student loan debt because fixated on that, or your mortgage or whatever, you can, I mean, if you can't pay it, you can't pay it. You got to buy groceries, you got to buy groceries, you got to buy diapers for the kids, you got to buy diapers for the kids. I mean, there's some priority levels there for sure.
With student loans though, you could get in trouble if they don't.
Yeah, they could end up garnishing wages and ultimately Social Security.
And I don't know I've seen this too, where they'll I don't know if it's like you go to jail, or at some point, if you just completely ignore them, they're gonna try to find you.
I definitely am not advocating for that. I think you've got, it's like your home or any other debt. You can tackle it, but you've got to start. It's like any, David Goggins, right? Starts with just one step. You got to just start down the path. And the reality is, if you stare at the mountain and you go, holy crap, I have 100,000 student loan, 25,000 in car, 200,000 mortgage, I am not going to make it. This is what's happening. And so people get stuck psychologically. There's no way. Well, okay, let's take through the steps, right? Step number one, how about figuring out a way to simply sock away $1,000? We call it fast cash, $1,000 for an emergency. Because why do people get like this? They get like this because they live paycheck to paycheck, and then something happens. Life happens. Their car breaks down, the HVAC, the roof leaks. What do? They put it on a credit card, or they go to Lowe's, and Lowe's gives them a credit card at the store, and then it just snowballs from there.
You know what I love about fantasy sports is that even though I'm not going to be a great basketball player or a baseball player or a football player or whatever, I feel like I get to participate and make decisions and use my knowledge of these different leagues or these different sports to compete. So it's like I can pick my team, or I can pick my favorite players, and I could use my knowledge to make predictions and maybe even make money. So with the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball from the Specials League on Prize Picks. This is a league created specifically for combo projections that include two or more players from different sports or leagues. Want to play alongside some of Prize Picks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, who's also been a guest on this podcast, and I've been a guest on his? You can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries for some of the biggest names in the Prize Picks community each week. Look, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. Prize Picks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. What? So, I love playing it. I love anywhere where I can use analytical ability with my interests to demonstrate some skill and maybe make some money. And I like the game-like aspect. I do wish they had chess as a category on prizepicks.com, but I'll settle for what they've got. Maybe I should make my own fantasy chess league. But in any case, I love Prize Picks. Go to prizepicks.com/James. Use code James for a first deposit match up to $100. That's the easiest $100 you're ever going to make. So that's prizepicks.com/James and use code James. Daily fantasy sports made easy.
Get sexual and reproductive health care from the experts wherever you are with Planned Parenthood Telehealth. Services include birth control, transgender hormone therapy, anxiety and depression treatment, PEP and PrEP, and more. Whether you're on the go or on your lunch break, it's the safe and inclusive space you trust from anywhere. Schedule now at ppncs.org/telehealth.
The future of learning is definitely online. Like, it's such BS that you have to spend $200,000 or take $200,000 in loans and go to some fancy school when it's useless. It doesn't guarantee you a job. Most employers, including me, do not care about degrees or grades or anything like that. We want to care that you love what you're doing, that you know what you're doing, in some cases that you have experience or that you're willing to learn. But people in general love learning and are curious. Like, the key to success is curiosity. And I think masterclass.com is the perfect model for online learning. I'm really happy they're sponsoring this episode. If you're going to give a gift, give the gift of learning. Masterclass makes a meaningful gift this season for you and anyone on your list, because both of you can learn from the best to become your best, from leadership to effective communication to cooking. Let me tell you some of the classes I've taken. I've taken comedy from Steve Martin. I mean, can you believe I can take a class from Steve Martin on comedy, or Judd Apatow, my favorite comedy director? I could take an actual class from him on writing. Wolfgang Puck on cooking. Dan Brown on writing, or Judy Bloom, who's been on this podcast, on writing. By the way, Wolfgang Puck also has been on this podcast. It's such a pleasure. I try to take classes all the time from masterclass.com. And whether you're watching Masterclass on TV or listening in audio mode in the app or on their site, the quality speaks for itself. It's like these Masterclass instructors are your own personal mentors that are going to help you reach the next level. How much would it cost to take one-on-one classes on comedy from Steve Martin or on chess from Gary Kasparov? You just wouldn't be able to do it. But it would cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. With a Masterclass annual membership, it's $10 a month. Memberships start at $120 a year for unlimited access to one-on-one classes with all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. So it's not just $120 for one instructor. You get all 180 plus Masterclass instructors. Boost your confidence and find practical takeaways you can apply to your life and at work. And if you own a business or are a team leader, use Masterclass to empower and create future-ready employees and leaders. That's the real education in today's world. So this holiday season, you can give one annual membership and get one free at masterclass.com/JAS. JAS, of course, stands for the James Altucher Show. So right now you can get two memberships for the price of one at masterclass.com/JAS. Masterclass.com/JAS. Offer terms apply.
I'm going to take an extreme, okay? So yes, in a normal world, and even in a not normal world, everyone needs to figure out how to cut expenses, figure out how to, adjust accordingly. But I'm going to go over everything and ask what you think of these ideas. So first off, let's take student loans for a second. And this is going to sound, everything I say is going to sound bad. But let's say I have a job, and for whatever reason, I could have my income, I can start a company like a C Corp. So it's, the way a C corporation happens is, there's a wall between my, private banking and private life and the C corporation. And if I get a job, I could have the job pay the C Corp, and then maybe I have some small income so that, as far as everyone can tell, that's what they see in terms of my income, so I can work out a deal to have my student loan debt, I could pay it off longer, or I could restructure it or something, because it'll appear to whoever's looking that I'm just making a much smaller income than is possible?
So I would say two things. The first thing I would say is if this person who's setting this up is intelligent enough and goes through enough hoops to figure that out and set that up appropriately, they need to be looking for a different job that pays them more, that allows them to pay off that student loan. I don't think most kids who are facing significant student loan debt are going to go through those hoops to set up a C corp and to avoid the student loan debt. They might, but I just don't see it happening. Again, I think that just is an extreme. I'm not an advocate for doing everything in their power to try to avoid it. I'm an advocate because we did pay off student loans. My wife had over $50,000 in student loan debt. We had 2 car loans. We had credit cards, and we ultimately paid all those off with paying off a mortgage as well. So it is totally possible. So that's the first thing. The second thing I'll say is when I first started in business, one of the things that we were asked by clients a lot is how to help with Medicaid strategies going into nursing homes. So we did a lot of repositioning of assets. Not anything illegal at the time. You could move money out of an individual's name. They could basically be shown as having 0 assets. You could do it within a 3-year look back window, so that if they went into the nursing home, then they could pay for a couple months and then get on Medicaid, and it would protect and shelter the assets for the family. Very quickly, nursing homes and Medicaid wised up to this strategy and shut it down. And so they extended the look back period for transferring assets. And in addition to that, they put in language that said, basically, if we have realized you've positioned assets out of somebody's name to avoid paying for long-term care expenses, we're going to get it. My point is that if that were to happen, and maybe you get first mover advantage, but if this becomes a widely used tactic, the government's going to shut it down, in my personal opinion.
So essentially, they'll realize one way or the other.
Yeah.
And you can't get away with it.
Well, people used to take credit cards, cash advance on their credit cards to pay off student loan debt and then declare bankruptcy, because they could do bankruptcy and they would lose their credit card debt, and they would once you declare bankruptcy, you cannot lose student loan debt. My understanding is that's all been sort of shut down. You can't do that anymore.
Bankruptcy is the one. Nothing can prevent the student loan debt.
Correct.
Everything else goes away when you declare bankruptcy. I don't know when that happened. I know I've had family members who declared bankruptcy to avoid student loan debt, but that is no matter what now. Even if you declare bankruptcy, you still have to pay. The only thing I get is that if you're having a trouble paying off your loans, it's like you said, you can do some sort of forbearance over some amount of time. But I'm thinking of even more extreme, like in this period, can you just not do it and survive somehow? But, and the other thing is maybe the government will provide some relief, but I don't think that will happen.
Well, I'm going to be very clear. It says I'm not a debt counselor. That's not what we do. We are working, and our podcast is directed towards people who are looking to maybe pay off debt, maybe not pay off debt, create wealth, set themselves up for the future, but ultimately get a hold of their finances and start at an earlier age making wise decisions for those finances so that they can be much better off in the future. One of the things is we started this podcast a couple of years ago with truly the idea and passion of taking what was an unscalable method to reach people and trying to turn it into a scalable solution. And it's worked very well. Now with the pandemic, whether you lost a job or not, I don't care who you are, you woke up to the fact that everything can go away like that. And I saw people who were professionals who would normally have incredible job security lose their jobs overnight because a clinic was shut down. They were a nurse or some kind of PA, and they lost their job. And the reality is that everybody across the United States of America woke up and said, holy cow, I don't have an emergency fund. I don't have money stocked away. I don't have this. And so the reality is, yes, there's a lot of people who are just looking at the next 15 and 30 days, but there's a lot more people that have woken up to the fact right now that if they lost their job tomorrow or this came back, they might have been making $150,000. They're not going to be able to stay in their house for 6 months. So our message is really geared towards people who, again, maybe they're just starting out. Maybe they do have insurmountable student loan debt. But I think if you're in a situation where you're 15, 30, 45 days from being kicked out and homeless, I think you've got to talk to a debt counselor. You've got to really talk to, some folks that are going to look and be able to help with, declaring bankruptcy and, et cetera. I mean, and that's not us. Our message is a little bit different.
So, okay, but that's interesting too. Like, let's say, everything's going wrong. The shit hit the fan. This pandemic happened. You lost your job. You have this mortgage. So here's another thing that maybe is a solution that people don't always think about. And I'm curious what you think. Okay, you made a mistake, or you didn't take into account the 1 in a million chance that you're in a pandemic and the economy's gonna shut down. Maybe you should just not pay your mortgage. Like, so yes, you have a mortgage payment every month, and it's not normal to not pay for it, but it also takes a bank quite a bit of time to evict, to take over your house. The bank doesn't necessarily want to take over everybody's house. There's a lot of people who are not paying their mortgage now. In fact, there's mortgage relief, there's renting relief. So maybe if someone's they don't have the savings. The average American had $400 in savings before this pandemic even shut. So imagine now, maybe they should just not pay their mortgage for 6 months, 12 months, and try to, either wait for eviction and you'll lose your credit score, but that's part of the contract that you signed, is that they're allowed to take over your house, but you're allowed to wait for a while. And, it's a different strategy. It's not necessarily the one anybody has to go through, but I'm wondering if they need food to eat, they don't have a place to stay, they could stay in their house, not pay their mortgage payments, and it's still going to take a while for the bank to evict you. Like, it might take a year or 18 months.
Yeah. I think nobody really wants to lose their home. So I would say that the first step would be calling the mortgage lender and saying, look, we can't make the mortgage payment. And you're right. No banks in the United States, especially after 08 and 09, want to take a bunch of residential real estate onto their balance sheet. Again, they just don't want to do that.
But are they like, a lot of banks, they've already sold off these rents. Sometimes they even sell off the rent to one hedge fund. I mean, the mortgage to one hedge fund, but the interest rates to another hedge fund, and they're just there to do the debt collection, servicing the debt. So is there anyone to call, or should I just wait for someone to sue me and which is legal? That's the contract I signed. If I either pay the mortgage or I lose. It's not even an ethical thing. The contract is available for both sides. It's just they could take it, but it allows you to kind of get yourself back together if it takes 12 to 18 months for them to actually evict you.
So you're going to call who's servicing the mortgage. So it could have been sold to Fannie or Freddie. And in that particular situation, if it was sold to the government, you're going to actually even have better negotiation tactics to be able to defer your payments and stay in your home. But the reality is, you may have to look at your home and say, I got to sell this. I have to put it up on the market right now.
But right now, nobody might be buying.
Believe it or not, they are. Home sales are ridiculously hot right now. That's crazy, but it is. I mean, houses are being sold left and right. We just had one of the hottest home sales numbers just recently, a couple of weeks ago. So I don't know how long that will last, but that might be a reality. Is you might have to say, okay, we can't pay this. What are we going to do? You're going to call whoever's servicing your mortgage. You're going to let them know. You're going to ask them very specifically, what programs do you have right now that gives us time to get back on our feet? What programs do you have? And again, discuss it. If I've seen it before. If you go into the hole, you have unique strategies you're proposing, but it will follow people. It will whether they, if worse comes to worse and you can't pay for groceries, and you're staring, and you've got $750 left in your account, and you're looking at either paying your mortgage payment or buying groceries for your family, you're buying groceries for your family. I mean, that's not even close. But the reality is, don't just shove that bill into a drawer and pretend like it's not there. And a lot of people do that. They throw their credit card into the drawer. They throw their bill into the drawer. They don't look at anything. And you got to take ownership. Take ownership. So the reality is, pick up the phone, have a conversation, and I will share this. Find someone in your life that you can talk to, someone that not all your friends are broke. If they are, you might want to look around and go, maybe I need new friends, right? So find someone in your life, maybe it's someone older, maybe it's not, and confide in them. We have a pandemic in our country. It's interesting. We talked a lot about this last night at dinner. My wife and I, we go to a large Christian church, and Christians around the country, we'll talk about everything. We'll talk about pornography. We'll talk about marital problems. We'll talk about this, that, and the other. Nobody will talk about their checkbook. Nobody will talk about their debt situation. So the reality is you may have to confide in somebody and say, I'm 30 days away from losing my home. What do I do? And have somebody that can help and look at everything you're doing and help you down that road. That may be what you need to do.
Because it's true, because I remember a few times when, in 2001, 2002, I owned an apartment in New York. Another time I owned a place upstate, and I was going broke, and you're right, I had nobody to talk to. I had no friends to talk to. And what I did was, my strategy is what I just described, is I just stopped paying the mortgage, and the bank was calling every day, so that's stressful, but I just wouldn't pay. I had my house for sale in both cases, and I just said, okay, I'm not going to pay. The interest is going to go up. I'm going to owe interest in months, and I'll just deduct that from whatever I'm paid if I sell this place, or I'll just get evicted, because there was nothing I could do. Like you said, I had to afford having, family and kids to raise and responsibilities. But you're right. Maybe an alternative for me should have been to kind of work something out, because none of these banks want nothing. They'd rather have something than nothing. Right. And I think the biggest lesson here in these critical situations is being proactive before anyone else is. Like, let's say you're the IRS. Everybody's in IRS debt right now. Okay, everybody lost their jobs in January. That's what they even postponed tax day 2 months. They had tax day though, even though the country still hasn't opened up yet, which means everybody's even worse off now than in April. And the one thing I know is, on the IRS side, better to work out a deal on your debt than not. Let's say you owe, I'm just going to make it up. Let's say you owe $30,000 to the IRS. Still better to ignore them. You can call up the IRS, and what sort of deals could you do there? Let's say you have that debt and you file, but you just can't afford to pay anything.
Yeah, again, it's communication. I mean, it's an interesting area that we've landed on, but it is so true. You call them up and you have a conversation, and they're going to ask you, they're going to get all of your information. I mean, they know they have all your returns anyways. They know what you make. They know what you did make. They know, your situation, and you're going to go into a mediation to discuss what your payment terms are going to be. And that's true with anything. It doesn't matter whether it's your landlord, your auto loan, your mortgage. Communicate. If you are going into a shell, you're stuck, and you're right. It will only compound itself. They're going to keep calling. They're going to come after you. And if they're the IRS, you could go to jail. I mean, that's the reality. You could go to jail. And so it's communicating and getting out there, having that conversation. And I think that if you're scared to have that conversation, I probably feel terrible for that person, because if they can't confide in their spouse or confide in a friend, then I don't know what they're going to do.
And I think having somebody to talk to and to communicate with could help reduce the stress. You can't hold it all in yourself. And I mean, and again, I know we start off discussing kind of like, okay, here's what you should do in general in life, and have the discipline to do this. But right now, there's sort of this unusual time where suddenly everyone's stuck with all of the problems at the same time. IRS debt, credit card debt, student loan debt, mortgage debt, and they're all experiencing it at the same time and they just don't know that there's no solution. They just feel screwed.
Right.
And it's not even people's fault necessarily, because who would expect a once in 100 years, everybody's forced to, have a lockdown.
Yeah.
It was not planned for.
And there's still a lot of people who are working. I mean, there's a lot of jobs. There's a lot of folks out there that are working. And what's even more tragic is if you're not adjusting your lifestyle and starting on a financial path of prudence, and you've witnessed all this. So again, if the person's already in this situation, we talked about it, communication, discussing their situation with others, having a plan of action. But if you're not in that situation, if you're, there's millions of 70% of the United States is still employed. So there's millions of people that are employed. But if you're not yet living within a budget, saving, having an emergency fund, we used to advocate 3 months. Now, I mean 6 months. I think a 6-month emergency fund is a given, because nobody knows when they're going to lose a job. It could come out of the blue.
So let me ask you that. So let's say, even forgetting about savings, because this is a little different than savings. Savings is something that you build up, you compound it, and then later on you can retire because you have enough money saved. This could help you for the rest of your life. But separately from that, there's the emergency fund. So people will say, okay, you always have to have 6 months saved just in case you're fired. It takes about 6 months, or it takes maybe even more than 6 months to get a new job, but 6 months gets you time to, switch your circumstances, downsize, stop paying, for a second car or whatever. So 6 months, I think that's the right number. Do you say, some people say 3 months, some people say a year. I agree with you. 6 months is probably, like, even when I was younger, I would try to have 6 months. Then I didn't save beyond that, though.
Yeah. So we kind of fall into categories. So people, let's say somebody has a job. We advocate having $1,000 fast cash. That's for out-of-pocket emergencies. So just the other day, we had to put 2 tires on a car. It was $400 and some odd dollars. And I had $1,000 fast cash, and I just paid for it. I didn't dip into the emergency fund. I didn't, I just paid it out of that. It was fine. Moving on. It's a hassle, but it's fine. Then emergency fund. And if you have a lot of ancillary debt, I would start with at least 3 months. So what I mean by ancillary debt is, let's say you have store cards. I call all debt is crap debt. You just have, real crap and less crap. And so people are like, well, what's good debt? I don't think there's a good debt. I don't care what the interest rate is. You're slave to, you're paying someone for something, as opposed to you keeping the money and earning money. So in my opinion, all debt is bad debt. The reality, though, is you've got store cards and credit cards, the ultimate crap. Then you have auto loans and student loans, and then ultimately mortgage. So if you have a tremendous amount of store cards and credit cards, I think having a 3-month emergency fund, and it's just as simple as saying, what are my expenses for 3 months? And if you don't know that, then you got to start even back, before that, and be tracking your expenses, building a budget, et cetera. 3 months in a savings account, not invested. People say, well, where should I invest that? No, in a savings account. You're not going to earn interest. It doesn't matter. It's an emergency fund. Then you start tackling your store cards, your credit cards. Now, if you have, I think this is a biggie. If you have a retirement plan at work and they're matching, I think you should be contributing to that and matching before you're doing any of this. Because if not, you're literally leaving money on the table. But that's kind of up in the air. People are like, well, I can't afford it. I really have to pay this off. Again, it's a kind of a personal situation or personal decision. But I do think you should take advantage of that match. Ultimately, then, credit card, store card, auto loan, gone. And depending upon where your student loan falls, again, if it's $20,000 to $40,000, you should work to pay it off. If it's $100,000, you're going to just have to put it in the monthly cash flow and factor it into your long-term, bill paying, just like you would your mortgage, for sure.
What about some like, let's say I borrowed money. Let's say I graduated college 6-7 years ago. I'm paying back this enormous amount. I'm trying to start a business or whatever. Maybe I call and try to get some postponement from, the government. Is there a way I could borrow? Let's say interest rates get lower as they are now. Like, interest rates are almost zero, according to the Federal Reserve. Should I refinance and try to borrow money elsewhere, pay back the student loan debt, but owe money now to the bank and pay lower interest rate? Or is there any way to kind of
of course,
cut a corner somewhere?
I mean, again, now fast forward. So now you're talking about somebody who's, let's say they're in their mid-30s. We look at this all the time. This is why, again, we take calls from people on our podcast and we answer those calls and we give our 2 cents. And a lot of those calls are just what you're talking about, strategies. So now let's say somebody's been in a home, right? They've got a mortgage. The rates are super low. They've got some equity there. Let's say they've been building up a 401k. There's a variety of places that if they're sitting there looking at a student loan that could be 6-7%, which is totally, a super sky high interest rate right now for debt, as opposed to credit cards, which are still, 12 to 15. But let's say the 7%, but they could do a cash out refi on their home and take money out of that at 3% and pay that off. That's probably a wise decision. Or, and this would be a worst case scenario, but depending on the company, they might be able to do a borrow from their 401k at a significantly low interest rate, pay that back through their payroll deductions, and knock that student loan out. There is some strategic maneuvering, but I would say this: you're only pursuing that if you've been disciplined enough to start down the path of being able to pay all these things with a plan of attack going forward.
Yeah, I agree. I think no matter what, if you're having a problem, you need to change strategies. And I'm even speaking for and this doesn't matter how much money you make. This doesn't matter how much money you have. My accountant tells me all the time, because on tax day, I'm always a mess and have to figure out like how much did I make? And because, sometimes there's been some years where I make no money, some years where I make good amount of money, but I'm always kind of clueless. And my accountant always says, James, why don't you just set aside money so no matter what, we can at least file, you pay something, then we figure it out. So it doesn't look like, you don't get into a problem. And I always say, oh, I'm definitely going to do that. And then I always never.
So why don't you do that?
Well, I always sort of figure, I'm going to invest and in startups or in myself. And then, okay, I'll file, but I'll pay penalties with the IRS, but the percentage of penalty is not going to be as great as what I could potentially make starting businesses or whatever. So again, I get into debt, but I play around a little bit. I'm always filing on time. I'm not trying to break any, I'm not trying to disappoint anybody, and it's the same thing with a house. I'd rather, I feel that, well, let me ask you this. Do you feel there's any situation where you should simply just stop paying your mortgage and just abandon your house?
There was one couple that I know quite well, and they, during 2008, 2009, were in a terrible financial situation, and they had a horrible, horrible mortgage, meaning it was one of these teaser loans with a kicker on the back end, and it was an adjustable rate, and yada, yada.
They scammed everyone with that.
It was horrible. And that was the only situation where I looked at them and I said, if I were in your shoes, I would turn the keys into the bank and I would walk away and I would start again. You will be 7 to 8 years to repair your credit. But I would not.
Which is fine, because don't get a credit card.
Right.
People always think, oh, I could live or die on my credit card. There's a lot of things. There's only very few situations where your credit score matters.
Well,
but
these
a car,
these folks wanted to buy a house again at some point down the line. They didn't, they ultimately didn't do it. They didn't take that advice. They actually stayed in the home. I don't know how it's worked out. We've not communicated in detail about that. But that's the only situation, because to my vantage point, there was literally nothing that could be done to salvage that debt and that value of that home.
But why should they give the keys to the bank? Why can't they? Because again, in order for the bank to really kick you out, they have to. It's a legal thing. It usually takes like anywhere between 6 to 18 months or longer. And I know that sounds unfair to the bank, but that's kind of part of it's not like borrowing from a friend, where I do consider it is unethical to be communicate with your friend and tell them the problem and eventually pay them back and so on. This is a contract you have with the bank. The contract specifically mentions what happens if you don't pay. So it's not like it's against the law. It's just against, and it's not like it's unethical. It's just, you're taking one path in the contract as opposed to another. Why have them turn in their keys? Why not just wait to get evicted? And I know this sounds crazy.
Well, somebody could do that. I mean, I wouldn't advocate that. I think there's, I couldn't do that personally. I guess somebody could. I couldn't. I would try desperately to pay it, or I would just, say, here, I can't pay it. The house is yours, and walk away. I would really try to honor my end. And sometimes, you know what, in life, I have tried to honor things, and it ends up biting me in the backside, and that's okay.
I appreciate that. And there's a spectrum, and there's a gray area there. Like, for instance, it's not like, oh, I should do something bad and nobody will know. That's different. This is like, you have a contract with the bank. I'm following the contract of the bank, and I'm just, instead of me giving them the keys, I'm just saying, hey, bank, you enforce the contract we signed. I'm not going to help you out here. This is it's still validating the contract. I'm not going against the contract. It's just now up to you to enforce what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I guess somebody could do that. Again, I personally wouldn't advocate for that. I think you continue to fight, and you continue to get after it, and you try your best to honor. I think maybe it's karma. Maybe there's some spiritual things about it. But I would try to honor the contract.
Yeah, and I agree with you. I just feel like in times like 2008, which we brought up, or 2009, I feel like so many people got scammed
Yes.
that it's they need, and everybody bailed out the banks, which I wasn't necessarily against. Like, you kind of have to keep the banks alive so the economy doesn't collapse, as opposed to the Great Depression. But the people who were really suffering and miserable and suicidal, no one was helping them. And I think they didn't realize they could just stop worrying about that for 6 months even. Just get your life together emotionally, get your family, feed your family, find a better job, or figure out a strategy, discipline for saving money better and paying this off. But ignore the bank for 6 months, or tell them I'm going to ignore you for 6 months and then pay whatever.
So
extra.
you alluded to, you did that.
Yeah.
So psychologically, was that helpful when you stopped?
No, I was miserable.
So it didn't work.
It didn't work, except for the fact that I didn't think about paying the bank for a few months until
But you had terrible thoughts at that time, if I
did.
remember from your writings.
Yeah,
I mean,
No, I was miserable, but I think I was probably less miserable than going broke during that time, which I would have had to done if I had paid the bank during those moments. Everything, the bank and everybody.
I guess I'm an optimist, and I'm a fighter, and I have, much like yourself, I have experienced success and many failures. And each time I have failed, I have decided I am going to pick myself up and I'm going to get after it again. And regardless of what's going on in this country, it's still one of the greatest countries in the world to be able to make a living and improve your personal situation. So if somebody's facing that, I personally believe that if they are kind of stop paying and I'm going to just not pay and let them deal with it, they've kind of taken a different mindset, and their psychology is going to be wrong, and it's going to be very difficult for them to be opportunistic in other areas.
Yeah, I agree. I wish in retrospect that I just had a little bit more support emotionally at this time, whether it was confiding in family or friends, or even seeing a therapist or taking medication. It's okay to do something about anxiety, whether it's medication that is made specifically for anti-anxiety or doing something else that cures anxiety. I think that was hurting me also, so I wasn't making rational decisions. Let's take another example, though. Let's say, going into March, economy's going down, everybody's laid off from their jobs. You have credit card debt. This is another example where I kind of tell people, hey, just don't pay for a while. And the reason I say that is I've been on the other side, meaning completely on the other side, meaning I've invested in consumer debt. So you could buy the bank after 90 days, they just sell all the credit card debt they have, and they figure these guys are not and never paying. I'm just going to sell, every dollar worth of debt I'm going to sell for 3 cents on the dollar. So I'll sell $1 million worth of debt for $300,000 or $30,000. That's what a bank will say. I'll sell it to some hedge fund. I'll write it down to $30,000. It just is what it is. And then the hedge funds, they try to collect, but you could then work out a deal with them and only pay 10 cents on the dollar or 6 cents on the dollar. Now your credit score will go down, but that's also a viable solution, which is perfectly legal, but it is, again, a little bit gray.
Yeah. I think your first course of action is a phone call and a conversation with your credit card company and saying, look, I need a couple months to be on hold here. I lost my job, et cetera. There's just not going to be a situation unless someone literally, if they're staring at supporting their family with food and sustenance as opposed to a bill, is the only time personally I'm going to say, just don't pay it. But always I'm going to say, have that phone call first. People, you're still dealing with human beings. And I thought it was hysterical. I had a charge on a card that I use. I don't use a lot of credit cards, but I do the points at sometimes, and I get points and so forth. And I'm not very good at that game, but I got a card charge like $125, and I was like, oh, I forgot to. That's my problem. I forget to cancel these things, and so I called them up and I said, I want to go ahead and cancel this card. And they said, well, why do you want to do that? I said, well, I'm always honest. I said, well, I used it for the points because I wanted the special bonus and we were buying some furniture, yada, yada. And I forgot to cancel and you just dinged me with $125. And so what did they say? Oh, well, would you be okay if we issued you a $125 credit for you to keep the card? And I said, yeah, sure, of course, no problem. So they issued a $125 credit. So there goes the fee. And I'll cancel it in 2 months. And this time I'll remember. But my point is, you got to call and have a conversation. It's almost like if you don't have that call, you go to another department. And when you get in that other department, the people are different. They come in and they're coming after you. Those phone calls are no longer nice. So if you are struggling and you are, dealing with these bills and you've got challenges in your work and you're stressed out at home, and compound that with the fact that you're getting 17 phone calls a day from debt collectors, that's terrible.
No, you're right. And what do you think it is? Like, again, there's a lot of psychology here as opposed to just money management. It's like what you're basically saying is, okay, have a plan, work on savings. Now, we'll discuss that in a second, and then there's this whole psychological component. And I kind of think I've never really trusted this system. Never really trusted the banks to be, to treat me fairly. I've never really trusted, the banks that deal with me fairly on mortgages, or never really trusted I do trust the IRS because I do feel if you call the IRS, it's so much better than them calling you.
Yeah.
That's 100%. There's all the spectrum of possibilities is just opens up an entire world when you are proactive there. But in general, I try to figure out, I take the view that no one's going to help me and I need to figure this out. And sometimes I need to ignore it so I can do something else with my life. And so I probably need to work on that. But the other thing is, when should you stop saving? Because under what circumstances, like I agree, have the emergency fund just in case the unexpected happens. But when should you not save because you're going to earn more, and every dollar you save now will be meaningless like 3, 4, 10 years from now.
Well, I don't understand that argument. I don't understand that. I don't explain what you mean, because I am a high earner. I have a successful business, but I save every month. So I don't understand. Are you saying that I could reinvest my savings and make more on my money?
Yeah, like let's say when I was 28, I just made it a point to put money in my 401k every month, and they would match it and whatever. And so become every month I would save $7 or $1,000. By the time I was 40, saving $1,000 or a month didn't make any sense. Either I was broke when I was 40, or I was saving like hundreds of thousands or millions because I was, so the numbers are different. The measurement is different.
But that's because you were an entrepreneur and you started a business. And when I was starting my business, I could not save. My friends were getting jobs, Wall Street investment bank firms. They were working, they were putting money, deferred comp, 401ks, et cetera. I had to pour every dime I could into business and pay bills and try to get out of debt. So early on, I was not saving. There was no savings to be had. So fast forward, now the business is successful. I have discretionary income. I have no debt, and I'm saving a lot. So I understand from that perspective, if you have started a business or you're an entrepreneur and you can't save, that's fine. But if you stayed at HBO forever and you continued in corporate world and you were saving $1,000 a month, you're how old now? You told me 52. You're 52. So 28 to 52, you would you'd have several millions of dollars inside your 401k right now available to you at retirement if you wanted to.
Right. No, I see. And what I guess I don't trust even the model of staying at at the same job for so long, because so many people lost their jobs. Like, so many people realized that it was not stable. The biggest risk they had was taking a stable job. So I guess I think more entrepreneurially for people even right now. But here's another question. What about when interest rates are so low, it's better to borrow than to save? So like buying a house, maybe I'm not going to buy a house when there's a 15% mortgage. But if there's a 2% mortgage, maybe that is the right way to buy a house, because if interest rates are at 2%, that's a way to stimulate the economy. The house is going to go up in value. Everybody's going to start buying houses. So might as well borrow as much as I can when it's 2%. The value of the house is going to go up faster than that
Until you lose your job.
until I use my job. Yeah.
So I, in 2019, about 2016 or 17, my wife and I realized a dream that we'd had for a long time, which was to pay off debt. Now, I want to share with you, James, that very quickly, just a lot of my aversion to debt comes from what I have seen in my family. My father had to declare bankruptcy.
Ditto for me as well.
His father, my grandfather, basically died penniless.
Ditto for me. You from the Bronx? Where you're
my mother's father, who was a very successful radio personality in Buffalo, New York. They actually owned a private island in the Bahamas when she was growing up. He died penniless. I have a long line of folks in my family that have made tremendous amount of monies and lost it all. So I have a healthy, I should say a very unhealthy aversion to debt. I realize that. In 16 or 17, my wife and I realized a dream and paid off our mortgage of our dream home as well. So it's not like, it's a beautiful home. We've invested greatly in our home. We love to invest in travel. I buy jeans from Walmart, right? So I'm different in weird ways. But anyways, in 2019, when the market was up 20-some%, I'm in the investment business, right? So I manage money for a living. I have money invested, retirement funds, et cetera. And I thought to myself, for the first time, I've known the math for a long time, but at the end of 2019, I went, wow, that hurt. That hurt that I didn't have a mortgage at 3% and compounding my money at 25, right? That one hurt. Fast forward, I can't tell you the number of times in March, April, and May of 2020 when I was sitting in the kitchen putting groceries away or whatever, and I looked at my wife and I said, I am so glad we do not have a mortgage. My entire livelihood, my business is dedicated to the markets. The markets were in free fall. We didn't know if the economy was going to ever reopen. Remember the debt markets in March of 2000? I mean, we watched credit, high quality corporate debt absolutely falling apart. I was thinking I wouldn't have a business. My clients would need their money. I would be out of business. I thanked the Lord, and I was so pleased that we didn't have debt. So again, yes, there's the math when it comes to, and people all the time, they're like, well, what do you feel about mortgage debt? I'm making good money. And I said, well, there's mathematics, and the math will say, borrow as much as you can and don't pay it off. Never pay it off. I said, then there's psychology. And the psychology, when you lay your head on the pillow at night, if you are 100% secure that if you lost your job, if the economy didn't reopen or whatever happened, and prior to this year, I would say that to people and they'd be like, Quint, come on, you're crazy. But I was 10 years old in 1987 when the stock market crashed, and we went from having lobster. We were in Maui the year before as a family because my father was a broker. And that fall of that year, we bought our coats from Salvation Army. I was a product of watching what the stock market could do and how could it change your life immediately.
Were you scared when your parents suddenly didn't have the same life and lifestyle that you thought was just normal everyday lifestyle?
So fear, I don't think I could say it was fear, but it was a realization that, wow, this can go very quickly. My mother was a saint. She had been with my father. They are unfortunately divorced now, but at the time, she had been a broker's wife since the early 70s. So she was very accustomed to these ups and downs. This was news to me. I mean, this was brand new for me, but it always stuck with me. And that's why, fast forward to 2000, when I started building my business, I had no aversion to the fact that this market could continue to plummet, all through 9/11. When 08 and 09 hit, I mean, we built our business through that time period because we did very well through that time period. And then again, I've always kind of been that guy in the room that goes, yeah, but what if? What if this happens? What if that happens? I'm not the black swan guy. But then fast forward now, I don't know a single person who isn't walking around going, holy crap, anything can happen, right? So again, being prudent with your resources, being prudent with your budget, and making sure you're on the right path to ward off these financial difficulties is so critical right now.
It's interesting because I think we sort of we ended up at the same place, but in completely psychologically different ways, which is interesting to know, which is that, for instance, I've never had, in my entire life, I've never had a credit card. So I've never been in any credit card debt ever. And it's not because, I wanted to avoid that kind of debt. It's simply because I'm so bad at paperwork, I've never even applied to get a credit card. The problem with never having a credit card is that my credit score looks weird to people who see someone who's never, like, apparently everybody in the United States, I guess, has a credit card. So every time I like rent a different place, they always want to meet me, like the whole condo board or whatever, like who never has had a credit card. They've never seen anything like that. So the fact that I am the one person who's never been in credit card debt, that almost causes me more problem. They ask for more money up front because they think there's something wrong with me. So I've had that almost that extreme, but I've been lucky with that because I probably would have had too much debt and whatever. But housing, because I've had problems with mortgage debt before, I think that's why I don't even like to rent a place anymore. Like for years, I just lived in Airbnb, so I didn't even have to deal with renting a place. I would just live from Airbnb to Airbnb. It seemed like too much hassle to rent and to have a year-long commitment. Even though I would still pay the same amount over a year or maybe more, I was just afraid of any kind of loan or commitment or anything. And then student loan debt, I paid for that, but it was a different thing back in the 90s than it is now. And I sort of avoided most of the problems, but it was for all psychologically different reasons. Just I was afraid of debt rather than being very organized.
Yeah. Well, you're interesting in that you have built a brand. You have the ability to monetize that brand, make money. You probably, go through periods where you make vast amounts of money and then you don't, whatever. Most people are not like that. I mean, most people have a job. They get a W-2 income. They get paid every 2 weeks if they have a job, if they're lucky enough to have a job. And I share with people that the reality is they need to treat their home like a business. They really do. In fact, we go so far in the book, I discuss how you have to decide who the CFO is of the marriage if you're married. Sometimes, again, I'm just speaking in the context of a man and woman. I know, different marriages, different relationships is fine, but sometimes the woman is more of the CFO and the man is not. And
I think that's definitely true.
Well,
almost every couple I've ever talked to.
Well, whoever is the CFO has to take on that role and they have to own it. And the other person, the spouse, has to support that person. So in my family, I'm the numbers guy. I'm the CFO. My wife is such a wonderful support. She hates it. She cannot stand it. It's one of these things over the years. I'm like, honey, do you have the receipts when you went to the store? And she's like, yes, honey, I have the receipts. Here you go. But she does it. She appeases me. It works out wonderfully. But I share with people, imagine going in to your job, sitting down with your boss and saying, I've been here for a while. I'd like to get a raise. Be considered for a raise. Well, not sure if it's in the budget, but, we'll let you know. Oh yeah. Okay. No problem. So when you do the budget, well, no, it's not when we do the budget. We don't actually have a budget. We don't really, when money comes in, we just kind of pay bills and we hope there's enough money. What would that person do? You would leave, you would update your resume, get on LinkedIn. You'd be like, I'm out of here. This business is not going to last. But yet we don't operate our homes in that same manner. We go into our homes and we're like, oh, well, money came in and now we're just spending it. We don't have any, idea of what comes in, where it goes, what the goals, what the objectives are. And yet we hold a business where we work our employer to a totally different standard. If people adopted the same mentality that small businesses or successful businesses, I should say, adopt with their finances, then they'd be better off. But we just don't do that in our personal lives.
And do you ever factor in, like, let's say there's inflation and the Federal Reserve said today, for instance, I don't necessarily believe them, but they said they're going to try to create much more inflation in the US because right now we're in this deflationary period, which they haven't been very successful at avoiding, so they're going to do whatever it takes to have inflation, which means you kind of want to borrow because the dollars are going to be worth less, so you'll be making more ostensibly later, and it'll be easier to pay down your debt. So I just wonder, when do you kind of say, okay, I used to be serious about paying back all my debt, but now I'm just going to pay the minimum because kind of macroeconomically things are happening that makes it better to pay the minimum per month than to have no debt at all. Like you have no debt at all, right, with your house because you pay back the mortgage debt. But sometimes it's good to have to pay the minimum when the entire economy is being set up to encourage you to have a little bit of debt at low interest rates?
I would say most people would probably agree with you. Most people would agree, macroeconomics aside, they would agree just purely with the mathematics of low interest rate debt versus high interest savings and so forth. I have a psychological aversion to that. It is embedded in me. It is I had a very successful business mentor of mine say, Quint, you're probably holding yourself back with this, because I didn't, even our office building we bought, little debt, put cash in it to redo the building and so forth. And he said, you're probably, holding yourself back from some success, and that's okay, I guess. I mean, I'm okay with that. It is what it is. So,
no, but you make a good point though, that a lot of this is psychological, and I think that's important. It can't be
no question
ignored. I think it's the Benjamin Franklin quote: if you just spend less than you make, you're going to be happy.
Well,
and it's a little easier to do that if early on, as fast as possible, you have no debt, because that's still spending. All those interest payments are spending. So it's a different kind of psychology. So if I owe money that I'm paying over time, some people don't mind that. Some people do. Some people can't pay it in an extreme situation, so they have to figure out the psychology there. But I think you're right. No matter what, you're convincing me. No matter what, it's worth looking at your bank account and seeing what you spend on. Like, I don't. There was a period of about 2 years up until recently where I just I had an aversion to looking at my bank account. I was just scared to log in to my Chase account or whatever, Wells Fargo account, and look at what was in there, because I just didn't want to see it. I almost had PTSD from the prior time I had been broke, and I would look at the bank account and be like negative. But then when I did look at the account, I realized someone was withdrawing money from my account every month, like someone who I had, forgotten I'd, let them make a transfer at one point, or I'd helped them out at one point, and they were just basically stealing from me.
Holy cow, yeah.
And I realized I was essentially supporting someone for about a year and a half. This whole period, I didn't look at the account. And so now I'm trying to be better and deal with my own psychological issues with looking at my account. I agree with you. It's important to measure what you're spending on, because then I realized, I didn't realize I'm paying for this service that on the TV that I wanted to watch one show once, but now I've been paying them $59 a month ever since I started. Or I didn't realize I was subscribing to this thing from Amazon, or this other thing, or this other thing. And so quickly, once I started looking at that, I realized I was saving like thousands of dollars a month by canceling these things.
Well, and I think you can do this. You can do this with Robin. I mean, maybe, and this is the thing, that might not be your strong suit. You may always forever have PTSD looking at this, right? Right now, business is good. You're doing well. I don't know. I'm assuming. And maybe that's not always going to be the case. You'll go through rough patches. We all do. And then, because everybody likes looking at it when things are good. It's easy to look at it when you got enough money in the account to pay the bills. Nobody likes to look at it when times are tough. It immediately shuts down.
No, even when it is going okay, but I still don't, I just hate it. I can't stand looking at it.
So give that job to Robin. I mean, as a partnership, have her do that. I mean, have her be handling it, but someone, I think you might not, you're not, if you were in my company, if we were working together, you would not be the CFO. I mean, no way. You'd be like head of brand, creative, PR, marketing, business strategies, etc. And we'd be like, James, but we'll handle the accounting. Accounting, finance, numbers clearly. But I'd be like, that's not your strong suit. You figure out how to make the money, and we'll figure out where it should go. So in your situation, hopefully Robin's the CFO. You're the supporting character. I mean, you're the supporting guy who says, look, Robin, make sure you take care of it. What are we set up for? How long do I keep having to do? That sort of thing. But the reality is, you struck on a thing that I want to share, because the world, whether it's fitness, whether it's trading, investing, is all morphed into this understanding of psychology, that we know the math. Okay, years ago I lost 50 pounds. You'd believe it. I was 210 pounds. I'm 160. Yes.
What do you weigh right now?
I'm 160 right now. I'm 160 pounds. Thank you. But what I learned very quickly, I always knew what not to eat, what to eat, and how to exercise. I always knew that. My head was not in the game. It was psychology. I had to learn, first and foremost, how to step on a scale every day. What measures matters, right? I had to learn how to step on a scale every day and go, okay, what is influencing my body? What is not? I had to read books. I had to become educated, etc. Whether it's fitness, whether it's trading. I mean, think about psychology in stock trading or investing, right? Some of the smartest people in the world are terrible in the markets because they try to approach them in this rational, sort of methodology that does not work. When you understand the psychology of markets, which I learned a lot from, as we talked about from Rev, then you can really start to succeed. This is no different. Understanding personal finance is psychology. You've got to understand who you are, your approach to money, what has been embedded in you, what you've learned about money, and then ultimately, where's your skill set, where's your strength, where's your weakness to get on the right page to succeed in the future.
So out of the hundreds of people that you've looked at and helped them solve their debt problems, what's the most common thing where you would say, hey, maybe you should cut spending on this? You're barely going to notice that you're not spending it, and it'll be a great beginning to starting to cut expenses and increase savings.
Fast food and eating out, by far. And it's a lack of planning. It is a complete lack of planning and understanding. And I know this firsthand. When I first started, I remember it like it was yesterday. I needed to get a hold of my budget. I had a very limited income, was trying to build the business. And I said, okay, I was a big Dave Ramsey fan. I still am. And he's like, get a budget. You got to get a budget. So I sat down and I had a pen and paper and I was like, all right, well, this is my rent. This is my cell phone, or I don't even know I had a cell phone at the time. I probably had a pager. Sounds ridiculous. But this is what I spend on my car payment, yada, yada. And I was like, okay, eating out. Well, I don't know what I spend eating out. What's my utility bill? I don't know what my utility bill is. I got so frustrated. And then I went for a run or whatever I did. I don't remember. But then ultimately I came back. I said, okay, the only way I'm going to be able to develop a budget is I got to start tracking every dollar I spend for 30 days. And it just happened. It was a fluke that at that time we were coming into a new month. So starting literally like the day one of the month, I started writing down everything. I will never forget. I assumed I spent about $200 eating out. I got to $200 in like day 6. Because every time I turned around, I was single at the time, but hey, let's go for a beer, let's go get wings. Well, that's $50 every time. I was at $200. I realized I was eating most of my money.
And you think most people miscalculate this?
Oh, absolutely, tremendously. They also miscalculate things like what it truly costs for Christmas. Every family, I don't care how much in debt they are, they feel that they're almost owed a vacation. Like they owe it to their children. So factor in $2,000 to $3,000 a year that they throw on a credit card to take their kids on vacation. These things all can be budgeted for. They can be prepared for. But if you don't get a handle of where your money goes, and again, the number one thing I see is eating out, all of these ancillary expenses that could totally be avoided, you're never going to get ahead. You're never going to get ahead. The number one pitfall I see, this goes back to our whole discussion, is pride. I can look at somebody's expenses, number one, and I can say, okay, why do you, everything, I talk to them and I'll say, and I can tell very quickly whether we're going to be able to help somebody or not. This is in our business model, but I'm just telling you from experience. When somebody says, well, what's this $140, a month membership to this place? Oh, well, that's our gym or our whatever membership or whatever it is. Is that really necessary? Well, yeah, I mean, we're going there, and I'm like, you have $20,000 in credit card debt, and you're spending, $1,800 a year on this ancillary expense that can be cut in I mean, it just blows me away.
$1,800 is probably pays almost the entire interest payment.
That's exactly right. Absolutely. So it takes discipline. It takes fortitude. You got to have humility. I do believe in it. I hear you speak, and it is sad. I wish. You wouldn't be who you are today.
I disappointed you with my real philosophy on...
No. You wouldn't be who you are today. I wouldn't be here because you wouldn't have written all the things that you did. When you moved from finance to talking about your life, and it helped me, and I know millions of others so many times. It really kept me going, kept me in the right direction. So you wouldn't be who you are today if you didn't go through that. But it is sad that you didn't have a genuine friend to reach out to and be like, I'm broke.
No, that's really true. I mean, it was horrible, and I didn't even think I needed someone to confide in, and that was the lesson: is that you need. It was an insecurity on my part. I thought my net worth was my self worth, and even my perception, other people's perception of my net worth was my self worth, and I couldn't. Now I'm different. This was a hard lesson for me to learn, and it took 20 years to learn it, but I'm grateful I've learned it. But what's what's the worst personal finance advice you've heard from the pros who speak, I don't want to say Susie Orman, but the Susie Ormans of the world, the ones who write about personal finance, the Dave Ramseys of the world, the people who write about personal finance, have personal finance TV shows. What's the worst advice you've ever seen them give?
So I am not. This is Dave Ramsey is get out of debt at all costs kind of guy. So I don't throw him in this camp because I do respect his opinion on this. But and this goes back to what we've been talking about, when they only look at the math behind making financial decisions, meaning mortgage interest versus this, and they don't take into account psychology. I think once you start pulling back the onion layers of an individual and you understand what their view of money is, what their people will self-destruct. People have an aversion to money that they might have gotten as a child, where their parents almost embedded in them that it's a terrible thing to have money. It's a terrible thing to, people with money are evil. People with money are terrible. And so they start to get ahead. They start to become successful, and they're almost self-destruct because they have this deep-rooted belief that having money is a bad thing. And so I don't necessarily, it's the worst advice, but I think when I hear someone just saying, oh, well, you can borrow at 3% and you can invest over the long term in a diversified, account for 8%. Well, yeah, you should definitely do that. I think that is very dangerous, is what I'm trying to say. I think it's very dangerous because it totally doesn't take into account the person's, job security or lack thereof or whatever. It's not always going to be a W-2 income just coming in. I love when people say, I don't love this. That's tongue in cheek. But when everybody talks about the index, the S&P, well, just buy the S&P 500 and don't worry about it. It'll be fine. And that's great until the market's down 50%, 08 and 09, and you lose your job because you need the money. You're going to be taking that money out. So, I mean, this idea that everything is just roses and everything will be fine, just invest and don't even worry about it, is ludicrous. It's crazy.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. Like, I never rely on any specific outcome in the markets. I feel like I've kind of corrected all the mistakes I've made before to some extent, even though a lot of it's just ways around my psychology around money. But you run a wealth management firm. Just real quickly, what's your take? Like, what's going to happen next, in your opinion?
Well, the markets, as you've written about extensively, are totally disconnected from the economy. We have, a Fed and a government that's working very hard to keep the markets up, and the benefactor of a lot of the situation that we're in are some of the major corporations, the Amazons, et cetera, that are doing unbelievably well. So I think when I hate when people just bunt on the longer term, but there's always great opportunities in the stock market. I think there are great opportunities. I'm very optimistic. I do think, though, coming into the remainder of this year, there's going to be incredible volatility. If you were to say gun to head right now, I think we just have a lot of movement up and down coming into the election and after the election. But I really like, and I'm super optimistic of many of the companies out there and what they're doing. And so I'm not one of these people who sees the end of the world coming and so forth. I think we're going to get through our challenges. I think you continue to, if you're a younger person listening to this, you continue to dollar cost average in your index fund. You don't try to time the market. You have a diversified portfolio, and you do keep it very simple. But the way you can do that and sleep at night and not be concerned about the ups and downs in the market is having your financial house in order, making sure that your budget is true, your emergency fund is sound, et cetera.
And then what, for you, is the formula for calculating what your number is? When should someone, let's say someone has got the steady job or whatever, or they've made money in some way, their house went up in value, blah, blah, blah. What's the number? And everybody has a different number for retiring, but what's the number and how do you calculate it for when someone should retire? Again, realizing the specific number is not what I'm asking, but the formula.
So I'm going to answer this two ways. I had a number that I had always in my mind that was a big number and it was a wonderful goal. And I hit that when I was 40 years old, and I almost had a midlife crisis. And what I mean by that is I was finding a lot of my self-worth and my net worth. And when I hit a goal, I was like, well, then now what do I do? And I took some time by myself, and that actually resulted in why I'm here today, because I realized very quickly I probably will never retire. I absolutely love what I do. I love my profession of wealth management, but I realized that I definitely wanted to service and help more people. And so I created DIY Money, and with an objective of helping people. So I answered that. I know you didn't ask, you started out saying, what's my number, but how do I calculate it? And I'll answer that in a second. But the reality is I would encourage people as they're calculating this, as they're figuring this out, you write about this extensively. You don't say this specifically, but this is what I read is life is short. Life is too short to be miserable. Life is too short not to be following your passion, not to be pursuing something you love, not to be, loving the people around you, not to be, happy to the extent that you can on a daily basis. And so if you are miserable, I don't care how much money you're making in your job. I don't care what your W-2 income is. I don't care what you have in your 401k. If you are not happy with life and you're not pursuing a passion, you got to change that immediately. So again, I know that's not what you asked. Now, in our wealth management firm, we do retirement planning extensively. So there isn't a number per se. We don't necessarily back into a 4% rule and say, okay, let's figure out your budget and calculate 4%. In our firm, we actually start with that. We have a unique methodology. We do a long-term financial plan, but here's what's interesting. Again, I didn't realize how much this comes back until this podcast. We talked so much about psychology. In our firm, we calculate what we call a required rate of return. So we do all the math. People bring in their budget and they calculate what their life expectancy, inflation rate, and we figure out what the required rate of return is they need to earn on their money to reach their goals. So that's the math. But then we have 100 years of history that shows, well, in this portfolio, to earn this 6 or 7% that you need, here is the probability of up and down markets. Here's your standard deviation of loss and so forth. Can you handle a 30% really decline? And most of the time, what they feel like their portfolio should be doing versus what they really could handle is a disconnect. And that ultimately leads to poor financial decisions. So a lot of our planning procedure is once we figure out that required rate of return, we then have extensive conversations about volatility, again, standard deviation of loss, and understanding that, look, if you had a 60-40 portfolio and the market goes down 30%, you're down 18%. You have $1 million. Are you, Mr. and Mrs. Smith or whatever, are you okay being down $180,000? And when I put that in those terms, they go, 100, like we'd be down, you'd be, if you were a 60-40 portfolio in the market, you'd be at least throw in international and emerging markets, maybe $200,000, $250,000. So are you okay losing that? Well, no, absolutely not. Well, then we have to back off your risk, which means your required rate of return needs to be changed, and it comes back to the formula. So that's what we do in our firm every day. But again,
because even if the average is the market returns X, in those moments, like in 2008 or now,
Yep.
people are like, no, man, I can't. It's not the average anymore. And it's like, okay, just wait. No, it's done. People panic when it's their whole life that they're talking about.
No question about it. And so we have to find what the number is and the dollar amount is that they're comfortable based on history, right? And we have outliers for sure. We have these outliers, these events that transpire, but we have a lot of history. And so once we go through, and we've been successful at this with our firm, which took a long time. Look, I was a equity hedge fund trader myself, and I, was a short-term trader. And it took me a long time to build a business around the fact that we're not trying to overcomplicate things. But the reality is when the market was falling apart in March of this year, in April of this year, is to have conversations with people who were some were panicking. Thankfully, we have a extensive client base that many were not. They've been a client for a very long time, but some were. And we just say, look, your exposure is this. This is where we're at. It's within the realm of this, of what we talked about probability wise. Now we can change your allocation here, but we need you to know if we change your allocation, then this is going to affect the long term. Many people they said, okay, I'm good. Thank you for the discussion. We'll put it into context. We're fine. a few made changes, and that will impact them negatively going forward, obviously, because the market has roared back. So that's how we calculated it as a firm. But again, I do think I just wanted to share that I think it's important that when you reach your number, it doesn't mean, I think we're in this society where it's like, oh, I want to retire someday and just stop working. Well, if that's your end goal, I think you need to check what you're doing.
I agree with that. I mean, I think I spent the past 10 years kind of trying to stay out of the money game. Like I stopped running a hedge fund early on. I do manage some money, but in general, I focused on writing and even something as moneyless as stand-up comedy. And what it ends up happening is I've created more opportunities for myself than ever before. And so as long as you keep doing what you love, this is too much of a cliche. There will be opportunities, but you have to be aware of them. You have to look for them and find them and be creative and so on. And now I'm actually getting more excited about entrepreneurial stuff. And I'm trying to decide if I really want to put in that kind of time, even though I'm enjoying thinking about it. So I'm going through that right now. But anyway, Quint Tatro, host of the great podcast DIY Money, run Joule, Joule, wealth management. Is it Joule Wealth Management or
Joule
Money
Financial?
Management?
Yeah, Joule Financial.
Joule Financial. Thank you. I mean, not only are you on the podcast, you came down to Florida to come on the podcast on your birthday. So I really appreciate it. I'm sure all the listeners appreciate it. You gave great advice about debt. I think the key things for me is measure, the more you measure, the valuable it is. And also the psychology of debt, the psychology of money. People always forget to take that into account. There's math to the psychology because that shows you what is the risk you're willing to take outside of the risk that's reality. So that's important to measure as well. I really appreciate you coming on the podcast, and thanks once again.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Thanks.
Get sexual and reproductive health care from the experts wherever you are with Planned Parenthood Telehealth. Services include birth control, transgender hormone therapy, anxiety and depression treatment, PEP and PrEP, and more. Whether you're on the go or on your lunch break, it's the safe and inclusive space you trust from anywhere. Schedule now at ppncs.org/telehealth.